Hello, all. We are hanging out with the one and only Larry Johnson. Oh, hello, everybody. We are hanging out with Larry Johnson. We got a lot of things to talk about. Oh, but by the way, here's a big story. I'm not really going to get on into it. It's just one word in this story I find interesting about this. We'll leave it alone. I'm not going far with this one, but here's one. It's from RT. Macron to attempt to prove in the U.S. court his wife is a woman. He's going to make that attempt. Well, I wish him the best of luck. It certainly seems like maybe since he's going to attempt, maybe he's not as sure. I don't know. I'll put it like this, Larry. I would never say that I'm going to go to court to attempt to prove that I'm a man.
Well, what he's going to do. He's going to bring in Billy Joel.
You're right.
And Billy Joel's going to sing, "She's always a woman to me."
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that might be about the best evidence he can come up with, I fear. All right, let's get going before we get thrown off YouTube. We're not trying to what do they call it these days? We ain't trying to misgender nobody here. You're going to get thrown off YouTube for that. I don't even know what the hell it is, to be honest, at my age, but whatever it is, I don't want to do it. Get caught doing it.
Exactly.
All right. All right, let's start with this. Larry's got a great website, by the way, sonar21.com. That's Larry's website. So if you want to know what the hell's going on out here, you want to try to figure out what's happening, get a lot of good information, sonar21.com. That's Larry's website. We've got some articles we're working off there. All right, here's an interesting one. Dead bodies don't lie. The truth about Ukraine's military casualties. You know, Larry, the other day I saw a video of our boy Keith Kellogg. And he was talking about how, yes, Putin's losing and he's lost 1 million troops and, he can't continue to fight. His economy's crashing and all that kind of crap. And I'm thinking, interesting. I'm sure he probably got that from the same people that tell us when the Russians fire 100 missiles that the Ukrainians shot down 101.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And that's sort of what motivated me to write this. And I was just looking. A friend of mine, he's a retired West Point graduate. So he served the U.S. Army, served in Special Forces. He was also, while at West Point, the president of the Russian club. And that's because his family had escaped Russia before the Bolsheviks took over. But now he's moved back to Russia. He lives in Moscow now. And he sent me an updated list of the turning over the dead bodies. So, here's Kellogg saying, okay, yeah, Russia's losing. Oh man, they're barely creeping along. They're barely making tiny advances, but they're suffering massive casualties. And so, since at least January of this year, they have the Ukrainians and the Russians have agreed to exchange the dead bodies of their soldiers. So the Russians, pick up and put into body bags the bodies of dead Ukrainians, and presumably the Ukrainians are doing the same to dead Russians. Well, so far this year, let's say I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we're looking at probably 12,000 dead Ukrainians have been turned over, and the Ukrainians, by contrast, have turned over about 300 dead Russians. So you got a ratio of roughly, for every dead Russian, you're turning over 39, 40 dead Ukrainians. Well, that doesn't sound like Russia's suffering all the losses. And then here's where they get cute. Some of the same people that accept what Kellogg's saying will say, well, that's just because Russia's been advancing so fast, Ukraine doesn't have time to recover the bodies. You go, whoa, wait a second. I'm confused here. First, you're telling me that Russia is moving very, very slow. And no, so slow it down. No. But then all of a sudden you're saying, no, they're moving so fast we don't have time to pick up the bodies. So those numbers have been consistent since January. And it would be, in fact, if it was the case that Ukraine was advancing and crushing Russian positions, yeah, they would have a lot more Russian bodies perhaps to turn over. But what this tells you is the direction the war is going. It's going against Ukraine in a decisive fashion. And no matter, the thing is alarming about Kellogg is he claims that this is what he was telling Trump and that Trump was buying it. So that may explain why Donald Trump is so wrong on the policy towards Russia and Ukraine.
What's interesting is he does the classic straw man. If Putin was winning, he'd be in Odessa. If he was winning, he'd be west of the Dnipro. If he was winning, he would have changed the government. In fact, Russia is in fact losing this war. Well, that's an old straw man.
Yeah.
If they're not in Odessa, they're not winning. So if they take every inch of the country, they kill every soldier in Ukraine and take every inch of the country and say, we decided not to take Odessa. Well, you lost the war then. It's absurd.
Yeah.
And if he would have already changed the government, wait a minute. He says if he was winning, he would have changed the government. Once you change the government, you've already won. Plus, so that would be wrong. If he was winning, you don't change the government before you win. That's kind of like taking the capital of your enemy. You just won the war.
No, exactly. I look, one of these days, Russia will have taken Kiev and will have taken Odessa. Then we get to go to Kellogg and say, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah, exactly. And so what we have, but what are your thoughts on the fact of the one part you were saying, and that is how this affects Donald Trump's policies?
Well, Trump labors under the illusion that Russia is suffering terrible losses and believes that they can't sustain it. He's actually got a number of false assumptions. He's got that about the losses. Then he believes that if they just lower the price of oil low enough and cut off Russia selling oil to India and China, that Russia's economy will collapse. Well, none of those are true. The fact that the Russian tactics are such that they're minimizing the loss of life, they are not rushing to put soldiers in harm's way. And that's one of the reasons they've been advancing slowly in certain sectors. But again, it's to limit casualties, which stands in contrast with what the West has always assumed was the Soviet doctrine, disregard for human life, human wave attacks. Then, apart from that, Russians have the advantage in firepower, both with artillery, with rockets, missiles, with bombs from fixed-wing aircraft, and then the artillery shells on top of it. And so it's natural that there are going to be more Ukrainians dying than Russians, because the Russians have more they can fire at Ukrainians as opposed to what Ukraine can fire back.
Yeah, and what you have here to me is this is the guy. This is Macron and Starmer, etc. This is their guy. You know what I mean? Like their inside guy, so they can call him and say, "Hey, when you get in there, tell him this, that, this, and such," and he'll go, "Okay, got you guys. This is the story we're going with." Yeah, and then he goes into Trump and say, "Oh, the Russians are losing 1 million people a week," or whatever. Starmer and Macron and crew want him to tell him.
Yeah. No, they've. What's really curious about all of this attempt to feed a false narrative is still very strong among European leaders. And let's make a distinction. I talked with Alex Craner earlier today, and he pointed out. He says, recognize the split that exists between the populace, the German public, the French public, the British public, in terms of the war in Ukraine, as opposed to the leadership, the people who are, in running the governments in those three countries. And he said there is a real split. the governing leaders are so beholden to the financial interests, the banks in London and New York, that really have they've almost bet the house that they would get control of the Russia's resources, and that's where sort of this leadership obsession with taking Ukraine or keeping the war going to try to defeat Russia. But the public isn't buying it right now. Today, you got massive riots in France. I read upwards of 800,000 people in the streets.
Wow.
Yeah, you had over 500,000 the other day in London. So the people are starting to come out and make a strong showing against the existing government. So it remains to be seen how long they can continue to talk up funding the war, because they don't actually have the funds to send to Ukraine. That's the other crazy thing. All Germany, France, UK, they're all in recession, so they don't have a lot of spare cash laying around.
Well, the other part of it is this. I read something that said Ukraine now said they need 60 billion, and that's like not even just for war, because they got to pay the policemen and firemen and all, the other people. And it seems to me that the time is rapidly coming where they will not get the normal operating, because most Americans don't know we're paying their operating funds.
Yeah.
But what happens to the Ukrainian government when they can't pay people's pensions and they can't pay the policemen and the firemen and the teachers and all that other stuff that makes the country, go?
Well, and that's going to happen when if we get hit with a financial crisis here in the United States. There's some warning signs. There's this major this company that made loans. They've basically gone bankrupt, but they made loans to illegal immigrants to buy cars. Think about that. That's and you had quote investors. I mean, this was a multi-billion-dollar business, and now they're declaring bankruptcy. So they're, the investors who are crazy enough to put their money in that, they're going to lose money on that. Soybean farmers, they're hurting.
Oh, they're screwed.
Yeah, because they were planning on all this, selling these soybeans to China, and that market's disappeared. The Chinese said, "Yeah, screw you." China did the same to corn farmers, but the corn farmers are not in as bad a shape as the soybean farmers. So we're starting to get it's like a wildfire starting to break out. You got one here, you got one there, then all of a sudden it blows up into a massive fire. I think that's where we're headed economically, and which goes back to how do you fund these governments then? Where the average American citizen, British citizen, French citizen, they're not going to sit there anymore and just say, okay, yeah, let's send billions to Ukraine while we are being deprived of money to heat our homes or money to buy food.
Yeah, people are laying off, and they get laid off. Their job is laid off. They lose their farm, their land, their property. How are they going to survive? And I think the same is for Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu recently was saying, yes, we've got to learn that we may be an autarky. You're the size of New Jersey. You ain't going to be no damn autarky. Where are you going to make all the things you need? Not going to happen, right?
Right.
But I think by autarky, he means the United States is going to give us everything. They don't have any economy now. We are footing the bill, everything. It is a welfare state that we pay for. But if things start to come, we're $37 trillion in debt and things start going bad, the cash cow that Netanyahu and his crew are living off could go bad for them too.
Yeah. This Israel's living on borrowed time as well, and they've undertaken this. They started the offensive in Gaza on Tuesday or Monday afternoon. It coincided with the end of the Arab Islamic summit in Doha, and this was both a slap in the face to the United States, or just showing the United States that they've got absolutely no regard for what U.S. policies are, as well as they're overextending themselves. That's what's so crazy about this. Israel doesn't have unlimited resources, and yet with all these finite resources, both in terms of troops and materiel. One of these days that weakness is going to be exposed.
I also think this Charlie Kirk thing has opened up a conversation that the Zionists are not happy with,
Oh
in
boy.
that there's a lot of young people, because the organization was, getting a lot of money from these very rich Zionists. And it seems to be, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Charlie Kirk or was asked a few questions that he shouldn't have asked, or brought up a
Right.
few things. And so there's a lot of people, regardless of what anybody thinks, forget what you or I think, doesn't matter. There's a lot of young people out there that think Israel did them in, number one. You go online, there's a lot of people that are going to just absolutely believe that. And there's a lot of people questioning, especially in the, more and more young people. We want to be independent. Why in the heck are the Israelis running our government, and our government doesn't respond to us? And they blah, blah, blah. They're bringing up a question of people are saying, I'm an American, and I'm starting to feel like I don't have any input in my government that a foreign power does. That's not going to work out well for Israel support in the long run.
Well, let me give you some other numbers here. I just looked up. Candace Owens just had a show on yesterday, a podcast, where she was saying, look, she got some real questions, as you and I were discussing before we came on air. That's had in the 24 hours, 5 million views. I mean, so there's some people paying attention to her. The same with Tucker. Tucker did a 1 hour show the other day before yesterday, on Charlie Kirk, and he had Megyn Kelly on. He had actually Singh Uyghur of the Young Turks, a Democrat, liberal. He had an Orthodox priest. That's had 1.5 million views. So this is not an isolated, narrow segment, and it's attracting a lot of attention.
Yeah, and the question is, how long can the people in both parties, Democratic parties, just falling apart for any number of reasons, which it should fall apart. But Israel's a lot big part of it. I remember talking to a young guy from New York during the last election, and he says, yeah, none of my friends are voting for Kamala Harris or voting for Democrats at all. And I said, why? He said, he's from New York. He says, yeah, they're not doing it. I said, why is that? He said, with Gaza. Right? People are looking at the Democratic Party and they're disgusted with it. They're absolutely disgusted with it. For it's so many reasons to be disgusted with it, with all these parties. But, as we start to approach the midterms, I think there's going to be some political instability in the United States. People are really angry. It's so many things people are angry at. This is a strange time, Larry.
Well, yeah, because in the Republicans, in Trump administration in particular, Pam Bondi is not doing herself any favor. Which, they're talking about going after Antifa on terrorism charges. And I think there's a good reason to investigate who's funding Antifa, who's made that possible. But that the crimes that, if you're going to charge people, charge them for specific crimes. Did they vandalize? Did they attack? Did they use violence? Was there assault and battery? Don't just do a general, they're engaged with hate speech. Hate speech is so dangerous because basically it gives government the right to define what hate speech is. And that's, I got knocked off of YouTube for, quote, hate speech. I don't even sure what I said. And if I did say something hateful, I'd sure like a chance to be called out on it and apologize and say, no, I wasn't intending to be hateful to a particular group or organization. But, trying to make it so you can't talk about it. You can't talk about the fact that the Zionists are committing murder, committing genocide. And that's not, that's not anti-Semitic, because I know a lot of Christian Zionists who are not Jewish who hold the same view that I abhor, I despise. So, but within that, being able to disagree without feeling compelled that you got to engage with violence. This is like the training you went through as a police officer. When can you use deadly force? When you're an imminent threat of loss of life or grievous bodily harm, or somebody else nearby is facing the same threat, then yeah, at that point you can point the gun and shoot the person. But barring that, pulling the gun out and blasting away at somebody just because you don't like their speech, just because you don't like what they're saying, or how they're dressed, or none of that doesn't qualify as a threat. It may be annoying, but it's not a threat.
Yeah, if a bunch of people got together in a room and they all wore black and motorcycle helmets and said, we're Antifa and we hate whatever we hate, and they did it every Thursday, and then they played cards and they went home. But if they say, hey, we're going to go beat somebody up or whatever, and they go damage somebody's equipment or set something on fire, you can charge them specifically for beating the person up or setting something on fire or whatever the case may be. But if they don't, just meeting and saying something you might not like or might like, that once that gets started, what happens? Because I remember Biden, and when they were like, you remember this, they started saying we might have to go after domestic terrorists, and they were specifically saying MAGA people.
Right.
And I'm like, oh crap. Now they're going to start saying if you're a member of the wrong group or you wear a red hat, what else? And they were like, and this is what we can do to domestic terrorists. You know how that works. Next thing you know, they've taken your, all of your rights and you name it. I was horrified by that. Well, to me, it's the same thing, because you know what? If they had all those domestic terrorism laws, when they got out, Trump would have them. And if Trump makes them stronger, when he gets out, the next person will have them. And once they're in there, there ain't no guarantee that the person that supports you is going to be in there with them. What happens when the guy that doesn't like you gets in, or girl, and now they come after you because, hey, you're the enemy for this administration? That's the danger.
Yeah. And we saw it. I was over the weekend. I was in Texas attending a friend's 70th birthday party, and he was a West Point grad, and one of his classmates was there. And this man had been arrested after he was in the Capitol on January 6th. His principal reason for going in is he'd walked up to Capitol Hill, and being an older man with an enlarged prostate, needed to find a bathroom. So we went into the Capitol and went into the bathroom. And while there and coming out, he saw this one Capitol Hill policeman getting ready to just club this other person who wasn't threatening them. They were not making any threatening moves. And so this man, his name is Jim, he stopped the officer, said, hey, well, the FBI came after him 3 or 4 months later, accusing him of assaulting a police officer. He did nothing. And even though they were able to finally produce the video showing the encounter, that Jim was trying to prevent harm from being done to one of the people on the inside, nonetheless, they still put him in jail for a month. And that is, I think, has left sort of residual anger throughout the Trump supporters across the board, because they saw all the violence that the Antifa people engaged in back in, during Trump's first term, particularly during 2020. And now they're legitimately questioning, why wasn't that prosecuted, those acts of violence? Because, throwing rocks, burning cars, burning buildings, the minimum, that's vandalism. And, those people in my book, they should have been locked up. If you're going to come out and chant things about the government that the government doesn't like, well, that's too bad. They have the right to do that. So, I think we've got to be thoughtful and careful in this, because you're right. We do risk, if they can get out of control and make it illegal to have an opinion.
Yeah, well, that whole January 6th thing, I mean, as soon as I watched the first video and I saw a bunch of cops moving the barricades,
right,
so that the people could walk in, And I'm like, how could you charge somebody with a crime? You literally move the barricades and open the doors.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
supposed to be guarding this. Now, go inside and lock the doors and say you can't come in, and go inside and lock them. And then now if they break a window to come in or something, okay, fine, they're wrong. But when you literally open the door, right this way, gentlemen, you had people that were like taking selfies with the cops, asking, where's so-and-so office? Well, go right down there, make a right, and then it's up the hall. And I'm like, to say they facilitated it would be an understatement.
Right.
So how can you facilitate what essentially was like a tour of the Capitol, and then afterwards call everybody a terrorist? Now, if somebody went in and stole a laptop from Nancy Pelosi's office or something like that, that specifically is illegal. You can't steal a laptop from anywhere.
Right.
So, okay, that guy stole a laptop. You got him. That's a criminal act. You know better than to steal a laptop out of another person's office. But the idea that they hid all kinds, you had all kinds of video of people just meandering around, not bothered. They hid all of that. They selectively showed it. To me, it was, they would never tell us. To this day, I don't know why Kash Patel hasn't told us how the hell many FBI agents were there.
Yeah.
They'll never tell us. So I'm like, the whole thing to me seems like a government operation. And if it wasn't a planned government operation, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But once it happened, it seemed to me that they did everything they could to try. It was turned into, whether it was one initially, it was at some point became a government operation to hide information, to make things look in different ways they were, and to persecute the people that were there in as much as they could to make it appear like they were crazy terrorists or something. It was absurd.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. In fact, there were members of the Azov battalion, Ukrainians, Azov members that were brought into the crowd. They were flown in. There are pictures of it. I'm acquainted with a fellow named Yakov Applebaum. Yakov's XR Vision company was able to both identify found the images, and then was able through facial recognition software identify who the people were. These were hardcore neo-Nazis that were flown over. We subsequently learned by the Democrats, put up by the Democrats, and specifically sent into that crowd to try to create an incident.
Yeah, that was a mess. You know, I recall them saying that they tried to go after Trump, and I was like, saw a video where Trump said something like, well, just go up there peacefully and patriotically or something like that, to walk up there peacefully. And I said, and at that point, I'm like, look, you know, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not anti. It is what it is. You know me, I don't like any of them. I said, but if the man said walk up there peacefully, at that point, you got to leave him alone. You can't say he egged people on to do violence when he specifically said peacefully. At that point, I don't see how you could convict him of anything.
Right.
It was madness.
But, you know, by contrast, if he had said, okay, I want everybody out here in this crowd, I want you to grab a club, a brick, a bat, you know, whatever you can get your hands on. We're going to go up there and we're going to tear that place apart. Then, you know what? They could have fairly charged him with inciting to riot and inciting, you know, whatever. But that's not what happened. And yet we were sold the story as if that is what happened, or that these people went up and killed 6 police officers. The only people that died that day were protesters who were killed by police.
Oh, the whole story that they killed them. They told us that they killed police officers. Later on, we found out like some guy died of a stroke a couple of days later. Somebody committed suicide months later for unrelated stuff. And I'm like, but they were going, and then they had stuff out. Policeman died on this day.
Yeah.
It was just such an op. Okay, there's another interesting story. Once again, we're talking to Larry Johnson. He's got a great website, and his website is, oops. Oh, here we go. His website is sonar21.com. There, boy, I'm not the great techie guy here, but that's it. Now, here's another interesting article that I would want to get your take on. An emergency Arab Islamic summit in Doha is a rebuff to U.S. diplomacy. Now, the only thing, here are my thoughts on this that I want to ask you about. So we've got people from various Arab and various Islamic sects coming together. and saying, hey, this happened in Doha. But the other side of me says this: these people have been so captured by the US and England, they've been such puppets. And now, the Saudis, the Qataris, what have you, now they're getting their nose bloodied a little bit. Can I believe them? Are they complicit? What are your thoughts? It's something, there are people that says, no, Garland, this really is a changing dynamic in the Middle East. Do you think it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
This coming together was a consequence of the U.S. policy or failure of the United States to uphold its policy with respect to Qatar. Qatar has been the site of the U.S. Central Command's forward command post for well over 30 years, and is based at Al Udeid Air Force Base. The Combined Air Operations Center, CAOC, CAOC, is based there. That means you've got a U.S. military, U.S. general that's in charge of, and got this group of analysts and flight controllers, et cetera, and they're monitoring every air operation in the region from Egypt to Iran, and the north to Syria, to south to Yemen. So there's no way that Israel could have launched that attack in Doha, because that's only about 20 miles away from Al Udeid, without the full knowledge and participation of the United States. There's just no way. So when that attack took place, I've likened it to that scene from Godfather 2, when at the end of the kid's birthday party that day, Michael goes in and he's looking out the window of his bedroom and then ducks down because gunfire comes in. You tried to kill my family. That he was upset. Well, that was the Qataris. They sort of thought, man, we had this relationship with the United States. They were going to protect us, and they just screwed us. They allowed us to be attacked. Now, there's another story circulating suggesting that the Qataris were in on it. Maybe I don't, can't dismiss anything, but the consequences of that attack by Israel did two things. One, it finally, for the first time, got the United States to sign on to a United Nations Security Council resolution condemning Israel. Didn't say Israel by name, but it was like, that beastly little country that sits on the Mediterranean at the east end of the Mediterranean, and it's bordered by countries of Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. Yeah, that country, we condemn them. And the vote was unanimous in the Security Council to condemn them. In addition, there was then this emergency meeting of the Arab Islamic states. 54 countries showed up, including the representatives of the government of Yemen, of the Houthis. You had Egypt there, you had Iran there, Turkey, Azerbaijan. Here we see the picture of President Pezeshkian of Iran sitting down with Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. They used to be at each other's throats. In fact, the Saudis were actively engaged in proxy wars explicitly to undermine Iran. Now they're talking, and they've opened up diplomatic relations. Also, there was a meeting between the Pezeshkian and al-Sisi, the president of Egypt. So that was important because they apparently broke off diplomatic relations 34 years ago, and they announced coming out of that, hey, we're going to reopen diplomatic relations. So what you saw here was a coming together of al-Shara, aka al-Jalani, the former head of deputy commander of ISIS, and then the head of al-Nusra, and then the head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hey, you don't get much more jihadi than that guy. He met with President Pezeshkian of Iran, which 2 years ago, Jalani Shara was leading forces that were killing Iranians. So they all came together and basically agreed, we got to figure out something to do about Israel, including Turkey was saying this. Turkey, in my view, could do the most by cutting off the flow of oil, but that's another issue. They agreed that Israel needs to be expelled or at least suspended temporarily from the United Nations in order until it sort of earns its way back in as, hey, I'm going to play nice, I'm going to behave myself. So lots of there was consensus among these 54 countries that included Turkish countries, Arabic countries, Persian countries, and then Asian countries. Pakistan was there. And note that Pakistan now has announced that it's going to join BRICS. It's not going to stay in a dependent relationship with the United States, with the West. It's going to tell the U.S., hey, we'll do trade with you, but we're joining BRICS because we feel they'll do more to protect our interests.
It seems to me that they made Donald Trump look like a schmuck too, in a number of ways, not the least of which being Donald Trump comes out, oh, we didn't know anything about it. Oh, we're sorry, we didn't help. It'll never happen again, which nobody believed anyway. And immediately the Israelis come out, yeah, we'll do it anytime we want. Yeah, and we're going to do it, and we'll keep going. We don't care what country is it, Saudi Arabia, it doesn't matter. Wherever he is, we will attack. And we'll kill wherever our enemies are. We don't care. We'll attack him. There's something implicit in that. Since everybody knows they couldn't have done it without the United States, sure. It is implicit in that statement that, and Trump will help us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that the other thing was, as that meeting concluded on Monday, Marco Rubio was in Tel Aviv meeting with Bibi Netanyahu. And then Netanyahu comes out immediately and launches the attack into Gaza, the ground attack. Well, that makes it look like he got the marching orders from Washington to go do it. Or even if he didn't get, that's how it's perceived. And right. As you know, perception becomes reality.
Yep.
But it's also possible that Marco Rubio told him that the president would prefer you not do it. And Bibi Netanyahu just said, hey, kiss my ass. We're going to go do it. And in any event, it makes Rubio look bad vis-a-vis that Arab Islamic, those 54 countries, because they look at this guy and go, man, he shouldn't have been in that position while we're holding this meeting, because then Netanyahu can take some outrageous action, and he's now implicated in it. It makes it either look like you didn't have control or you had full control and you directed it. Either way, it's not a good look for Rubio. And it hurts the U.S. prestige in the area.
And I also think there's something that's going on now that's not being taken into account. Look, you need respect at home too. And I think a lot of people that formerly supported Trump and they thought he was a strong guy, a tough guy, he would stand up to whoever, are looking at him now saying basically, dude, you're the vice president of Israel. Right. You know what I mean? You're that's the way it comes across, like the vice president of Israel. He's coming across very weak. I think a lot of people are losing respect for Donald Trump, kind of looking at him saying, look, you're just a puppet. If the Israelis say jump, you'll say how high. I mean, I'm not saying that's a fact. For all I know, the United States could be saying, Israel, do this. You take the heat for it. We'll pretend like we didn't know. I don't know the truth. But I think the appearance is that Donald Trump is weak.
Yeah. No, it very much portrays him as such. And, it also feeds a meme that Trump's not calling the shots. Bibi Netanyahu is. Now, whether that's true or not, it's out there. And that's what many are believing and suggesting.
So then if Trump puts out a Truth Social post, if Trump says, I'm going to meet with the leader of this or that country, I'm going to Saudi Arabia, I'm going to wherever to meet with our friends there. I guess if you're a person in that country, why do you need to meet with Trump? I mean, what difference does it make? Why would you care? Because whatever he tells you, by the time he gets on the plane and leaves, the Israelis will do the opposite. Whether he's lying to you or whether they just don't pay attention to him, you don't know. But you have no expectation that anything that Donald Trump tells you will ultimately be relate to the U.S. foreign policy towards your government.
Right. Yeah, it is. When you talk about trying to build up U.S. credibility, people need to know: do you mean what you say, and can you act on it? And Trump continues to make threats about, we're going to sanction the hell out of Saudi Arabia or out of India and China, and then doesn't do it. He blinks. And one of the reasons he blinks is because the economic damage to the United States will be far greater than that which he can inflict upon these other countries. So they see that these threats have been made and not acted upon, and then they come to the conclusion, like having watched the United States cut and run out of the Red Sea. The Houthis drove them out. So yeah, Trump is fostering an image of weakness, not strength.
Yeah. And the weakness was when he went in the Red Sea after the Houthis, not when he got run out. You know what I mean? Because
right.
Like there's what am I going to go? There's a person in a wheelchair. And am I going to go? I'm going to kick their ass, because if I went over, if they bite me and I get a scratch, people say you lost. At least they got a punch in, right?
Yeah.
So when you pick on somebody half your size, you lost the fight. I mean, you lost the fight because you look bad for picking on them.
Yeah.
And God forbid we went in there and they ran us the hell out. And now the best we can do is allegedly there's blow up some boats that we claim are drug boats and fishermen, or I don't know what the hell this Venezuela thing is going on.
Well, yeah, it's a regime change operation. I mean, so you have a boat. This was the first one they blew up was a 60-foot cigarette boat, 4 outboard motors. I'm told that. So I asked about the range. With those 4 outboard motors fully filled up, I guess it comes close to like 200 gallons fuel in those all together.
That ain't going far.
Yeah. So they go to about 250, 300 miles.
Probably 300 horsepower. So that's 1,200 horse. Probably 300s. Probably 4 300s on them.
Yeah.
1,200 horses, buddy. I got a 150. Let me tell you something. You crank into that thing, she can burn some gas. 4 300s, you ain't going far when you crank into that sucker.
Yeah, so it's a 1,300-mile journey from Barquisimeto, or from was it Barquisimeto in Maracaibo in Venezuela to the United States. 1,300 miles. So that one tank of gas would get you 300 miles towards that. That means you still got another 1,000 miles to go, which means you're going to need probably 4 more fill-ups with gasoline. Well, to fill those 220 gallons, you need 42 jerry cans per cycle. A jerry can weighs 5 pounds. Just do the math. So all of a sudden, if you've got to carry, let's say, 300 jerry cans filled with gasoline on your boat, is there going to be any room on the boat for you?
Or the drugs.
Or the drugs. Well, I mean, it doesn't, it's just crazy. So on this, Trump is lying. They're just flat out lying about it. And the press is letting them get away with it. Everyone's just saying, oh, okay, yeah. I mean, it's just not true. It's objectively not true. You can't, they can't reach, those boats cannot reach the United States with drugs. Or, if they got lucky and made it, the cost of the trip alone would probably use up all the value of the drugs that were on board.
None of it makes sense. Well, they say regime change. Man, Venezuela's a big country with a lot of armed people. I mean, geez, would you really want to get into a war with troops on the ground where they got like 4 million people armed with AK-47s in their militia? I mean, you want to talk about a freaking disaster.
Right.
To go in there and say, all right, we're going to take this country, jungles, mountains and jungles. That's pretty much the whole country there. Jungles and mountains. It goes into the Amazon, for God's sake.
Yeah, and that road up from the airport to Caracas, I was on that once. Boy, I made a mistake. I was young and stupid. I had to go down to do an investigation, and instead of lining up secure transportation, I went with just one of these guys outside the airport. Hey, you want to ride?
Right.
Well, as we're driving along, I get the vibe that maybe I'm going to get rolled.
Right.
So I start talking. I initiate a conversation with the guy. He goes, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to hide out." And he goes, "Why?" I said, "I killed somebody, and so I'm escaping from trying to get away from the police." And he looked at me, and he just kept his hands on the wheel.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, we're not. I don't want to deal with this guy. He could be dangerous. Uh, and then I kicked myself in the ass later for saying, "You stupid." You should. I know I should have done it differently, but I said, I'll chalk it up to being younger, less wisdom.
Well, then there ain't a flat spot now that I've seen in Caracas area.
Yeah,
Everywhere you go, you're riding up the road. If you go riding up the road, it's one big ambush point. Everywhere in that country is one big ambush point. Road through the mountains, up the mountains, cliffs on this side, mountains on this side, jungles in between, ambush points. There's just for small arms fire and ambush points, there could not be a better country.
yeah. Think of it like, have you been to Austin, Texas?
No.
Oh man. So Venezuela is like Austin on steroids as far as the rolling hills and mountains and the ambush points along that road going up into Caracas. Americans, we would take if they are foolish enough to land Marines and somehow say we're going to go and occupy Caracas, we're going to get a lot of dead Marines.
Oh yeah.
And Trump will be vilified after that.
It would be a disaster. It would just be a disaster to try to take that country. I don't think you could do a regime change in that country. You could get in, but it'd be hard to get out alive. I wouldn't want to be an American in there, knowing that everywhere you go, they've armed 4 million people.
Yeah, their only hope is to try to buy off the military to pay the military enough money to overthrow Maduro.
Yeah, which having been there and talked to people there and talked to people in the government and talked to people in the military, the problem with that is this. Here's the problem. I had a guy there explain this to me as I talked about the military. And here's what he said. When Chavez was in power, he changed the laws in the military, and he had a lot of his supporters go through the military academies.
Mm-hmm.
So the leaders of the military in that country are diehard Chavistas, as they call them. So the problem with buying out the military there is, ideologically speaking, they hate the people who are running the military all throughout that country are diehard, Maduro, Chavez, etc. So in that country, because I talked to a guy specifically about it, and he was explaining to me how this is how they do it in other countries and blah, blah, blah. But here's why it wouldn't work here. So even then, good luck doing that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Bottom line is, this ain't the country you want to go. And it's huge. Yeah. It is a huge country. You don't want to do that.
But Trump seems hell-bent on doing it. And look, again, we are committing acts of terrorism. We're killing these people in these boats without visual identification, without giving them a chance to surrender. When you pull a gun out and point it at somebody, if they don't have a weapon pointed at you, or a knife and some weapon in hand, then you don't have the right to shoot them. I mean, if you did that and claiming self-defense, but do they have a weapon? No. Were they approaching you? No. Well, then you're going to prison.
I remember it was 1993. I bought a new car, and there was a 7-Eleven around the corner from me. True story. That I would go in every day and get coffee. Right. I went in one day and I got my cup of coffee and I left, and there was a bunch of people in there, and I had just bought a new car. And the guy, when I came back in, the guy was laughing. And I said, what? He says, well, there was several guys in here and they saw you come in here with that new car in the car. And they said, yeah, he got that car selling drugs. And the guy said, I said, no, that guy's a cop. I know him. He comes in every day. And they said, they were just like, oh, like felt like fool. But again, here's my point. You could identify me as a drug dealer. I was a cop.
Yeah.
Could you just shoot me? Could you say I was a fairly young guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what have you? Probably had on a sweatsuit coming from the gym or whatever. They saw me getting out of it. Oh, he's a drug dealer. Could you have just said, look at that guy. He's a drug dealer. And just shot me and blew my car up?
Yeah.
No. I have a right for somebody to question me. Show me the evidence that this is nothing. And that's essentially what they did to this guy.
Yeah.
These
or
people.
Be a black man in the wrong neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly.
Was it Chris Rock that did the piece on driving while black? Or, but you're right. I mean, it's just because you perceive or think or believe. No. This, look, the standard, and as a firearms instructor, and I teach do this concealed carry classes, teach defensive pistol. The thing I impart to the students is, number one, we're teaching you how to use a firearm, but the very, 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 very last thing you ever want to do is have to shoot and kill somebody. Right. That is the last thing you want to do. So the only circumstance under which you can do that is if they are threatening you with immediate loss of life or grievous bodily harm. Now, I think that's actually a good rule that ought to apply to international relations too. Because we do way too much killing in the United States we thought they were a bad guy. Whoops, our bad. And it's like, wait a second. You ended the lives of 11 people in a boat just because you claimed they were drug traffickers. Again, no proof. Is it, God, are you saying that the U.S. government can make mistakes? Yeah, hell yes. All the time.
I remember one time we locked up 4 guys in this operation. They were a theft operation. They had this garage full of stolen goods and all. So we locked these 4 guys up. The FBI comes down, takes one of the guys and goes off. And we're like, well, what, blah, blah. They said, don't ask any questions. Well, we couldn't. We found out a year later he was an FBI agent who was undercover, and these guys were involved in organized crime. And he was an undercover FBI agent working with those people to get infiltrated and whatever, and deal with this organized crime group. So what do we do? Well, there's a bunch of criminals, shoot them all. That concept of I have decided that you're a criminal, shoot first and ask questions later. It's absurd. And it's unhinged. And one thing that always worries me, and that is whenever I see foreign policy, I always were concerned and say that'll come home. You know what I mean? And what's coming home to us?
Well, and this illustrates the difference between the United States and Russia. And so the United States endorses a policy, I call it the Hitler principle. If only we'd killed Hitler, we could have avoided World War II. So we're going to kill these people that we think are enemies, even though they're not threatening to kill us. They're not attacking us right away, whereas Putin has made it clear, even that, they could have taken out Zelensky a long time ago, but he's not going to establish that as a principle.
Right.
We're not going to set that up as something acceptable. We're going to treat that as unacceptable. And yet we got the West accusing Putin of being a savage and a murderer. When look at the blood that's on our hands. It's the buckets.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Israelis kill more civilians in a week than the Russians have killed in 3 years of combat. Literally, the numbers in 3 years of civilians dead. The Israelis did that the first month.
Yeah. No, and it's it is unconscionable, and we enable it. We allow it to go on.
Last thing I want to ask you, what do you think about this? Before we go, this whole business about these Europeans saying that they want to go, that they want to go into Ukraine and send this reassurance force and all of this talk when they don't really have anything to send.
Yeah.
They're all hated by their own people. What do you think about all of this business about the Europeans claiming that they're ready to go in and have at it with Russia on any given day.
Yeah, it reminds you of, I'm sure you had the experience when you were a kid, a bunch of teenagers sitting around, man, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and it may be risky or maybe slightly, questionable. But then when it comes time to actually get up and go do it, go to the door, come on, let's go. You're more like John Belushi in Animal House, where he goes, come on, let's go. And he goes running out the door and nobody follows him.
Right.
That's Europe. Europe's in the position where they say, we're gonna you bring those sanctions hard, Mr. President, and we'll follow you. We'll be right there. And Trump goes, oh no, you guys go first. You guys cut off the oil. And I watched a little bit of the press conference today between Trump and Starmer. One thing that didn't come up was, the reason why England's not putting those sanctions on India is because Starmer just about a month ago signed a free trade agreement with India. Why? He's not going to go irritate him and anger him. That'd be crazy. So Europe's talking tough, and they tried to stage earlier this week the Russian drone attack on Poland. And then it turns out the drones that they were firing were basically, you could make them for $500. They were basically styrofoam and plastic. Didn't carry any explosives. And it looks like they were launched out of Ukraine by the Ukrainians to create an incident as if it was Russian, to try to provoke NATO into responding. And then today, the Poles finally come out and admit, okay, yeah, we think there were 19 drones, but we only shot down 3 of them. And that one house that we said had been attacked by the drones, that was hit with our Sidewinder missile. We're sorry. Dude, you just can't make this stuff up.
It is absolutely absurd. Well, everybody, we're going to thank Larry for coming with us, for hanging out with us today. And
yeah, man, that hour flew by.
It really flies. It really flies by. We have a lot of fun. There we go. Sonar 21. This is Larry's website, everybody. It's sonar21.com. A lot of great articles. He has guest contributors there. And don't forget, everybody, subscribe. You can click on subscribe there, and you can subscribe. Also, of course, you can do PayPal, PayShoot, Patreon, or buy me a coffee to support. Remember, that everybody that's doing this, the people, Larry and me and Scott and everybody else, we are getting paid. We're just hopefully scrambling enough money to, pay what little, what we put out for these websites and equipment and different things, and maybe trying to get a sandwich or a cup of coffee every now and then, if you guys are good enough. So please make sure when you go to sonar21.com, if you can afford it, make sure you support the channel. And whether you can, whether you donate or whatever, go to sonar21.com and share that on all your social media platforms. And don't forget, share this video on all your social media platforms. We're out.